I'm Laura Blumenthal on the BeYou Podcast, and joining me today is Zoe Coates from the Thames Valley Positive Support charity based in Slough. Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for having me.
Now, the charity supports those affected by HIV, and you help run the BeYou program, which offers training and workshops for the LGBT community. Now, what attracted you to working for the charity, and what does it do exactly?
I'll start with what the charity does, because there's two sides to TVPS, and I think people get a bit confused. So TVPS is a HIV support charity. So we support people who are HIV positive. We provide support around their diagnosis, and how they deal with that. Any other issues they've got going on in their life, we kind of help tackle, to make their diagnosis an easier thing to process. And we also do a lot of advocacy and awareness out in the community and to other organisations. So the other part of the charity is we also run a social and emotional support group for anyone over 18 who identifies with the LGBT community. And that LGBT group is called BeYou. And as part of BeYou, it's not just the meet-up group once a month. We also go out doing a lot of awareness and inclusivity training to local organisations around Slough and the surrounding areas. And that's just to get the message out there and help people with, I know there's a lot of new language people get a bit stumped on, and just helping organisations become a bit more inclusive in their practices and their language. So that's a big part of the BeYou service as well. I think what people tend to get confused on is we do HIV support, but you don't have to be HIV positive to come to BeYou. BeYou is for anyone in the LGBT community.
And what about you, Zoe? What attracted you to the charity?
So what attracted me initially to the charity, going back to jobs I had, they were all admin heavy, working for bigger corporations behind a computer screen. And that works for some people. Some people thrive in that environment. I was just feeling I was leaving work at the end of the day, and that was it. I left work. I didn't feel I'd made a difference, benefited anyone, or it was beneficial, the work I was doing. So it sounds a bit cliche, but I wanted to get something out of the work I was doing. And I've always been passionate about human rights and advocating for people. So when I seen a HIV charity job role, I jumped for it, not only for the benefits the job would give me in helping people and getting that sense of achievement, but also obviously as part of TVPS, the LGBT support that comes with it, the HIV support. As a lesbian myself, I feel really passionate about helping both of them communities. So that was a roundabout summary of what attracted me to the job.
And what are some of the issues that people come to you with, the things that they're struggling with, and what is the background of the charity which gives it its expertise and be able to support them?
The background of the charity, it's quite interesting actually how BeYou came about. So TVPS has been supporting HIV positive people since 1985. So they've got a lot of experience, and BeYou was actually set up originally by a group of our positive service users, who all identified as LGBT, and it was a way of kind of crossing over to another community that kind of affected a large portion of our HIV community. So I'd say that answers the expertise question, as it was set up by LGBT people for LGBT people. I mean, the issues and the challenges we see coming through our door are so varied and so different depending person to person. I always say no LGBT person goes through the same journey at all. So we see people come in 2025 still unable to come out to their family and friends, can't come out in the workplace. If they do, they face homophobia. We've got people on risk of homelessness um, as young as 18, on the brink of being kicked out by their family, and just the mental health statistics and the isolation that we see in people coming to us. I mean, we get quite a lot of people walking through the door at BeYou, and you just see their shoulders drop. And I think for a lot of people, despite the major issues that they're going through, just being in a place for 2, 3 hours surrounded by like-minded people who know exactly how it feels to be in the community, I think that does more benefit than anything really. Just having that support around you through similar people.
And I've been surprised for a number of years now that issues affecting gay and lesbian people in this country as well as abroad, it's just not really talked about that much in the media. There seems to be a real vacuum. And it's not as if the issues don't exist. So, what do you think are some of the most serious issues that gay and lesbians experience in this country that just don't get the spotlight they deserve?
Yes, that's a really interesting question, because obviously, I'm sure everyone's aware, there's a big attack in the media at the moment, particularly towards the trans community, which is unacceptable. And I think they're kind of making a villain out of a pocket of a community, which has been seen in history. If you go back to the 80s, there was a big backlash with the gay men, the HIV/AIDS crisis in the 80s. Unfortunately, that just seems to have turned to the trans community these days. But going back to your question, as gay and lesbian people, and I mean, we can't eradicate the bisexual people, the pansexual people, asexual people in the community, that you're right, they don't get spoken about in the media because of the vacuum all on the trans community. But it's not to say that any LGBT person doesn't face, it's not to say they don't face things day to day. Um, I mean, like I said in the previous question, there's people still struggling to come out. As a lesbian myself, I know firsthand there's definitely more work to be done for every part of the community. I mean, it's little things that I think the wider society don't really know still go on. From my personal experience, me and my fiance still, we do worry about holding hands in the street. Um, and I know Stonewall did a huge project and a survey, I think it was at the start of this year, and that was all around how many LGBT people feel safe to hold their partner's hand in public. And the statistics and what came from that was quite shocking to see still in 2025. Even going to job interviews, I mean, that person's a stranger to you. You don't know their background, their culture, their views, their opinions. And I like to bring up job interviews because that's one place I think it really is weighing up. Do I out myself? Will it affect the outcome of the job?
Are you talking about when you have to fill out forms when you apply for jobs online and it asks about your sexual orientation and things like that?
I mean, that as well, but I was more referencing the physical job interview. I know personally I've been in job interviews where I've not felt 100% comfortable just coming out within the interview, and it's been a
Has that
fault of
happened before? Because I've never talked about my sexuality in a job interview.
yeah. So people say that to me, and I always say it's not a conscious question. So it's not like we're getting asked, "Oh, what gender is your partner?" It's more if they're asking about your life or your hobbies, and you mention you've got a fiance or a partner, it's the automatic assumption that that's going to be the opposite gender. And often when you have to correct people and say, oh, actually it's a girlfriend, it's sitting in that uncomfortability then that you've picked up that they were wrong. And it's also, I mean, I don't particularly like it because I feel I've made that person uncomfortable, but at the same time they shouldn't have assumed the gender of my partner.
And coming back to what you were saying, Zoe, on people not being comfortable to hold their partner's hand, I do feel I'm not part of the LGBT community, but I am a supporter, that there is still a culture in this country that a lot of gay and lesbians aren't, they don't have the right to be left alone. So you are worried that you might be mocked by
Yeah.
someone or even attacked by someone. And
Yeah,
obviously that's different in different places and everything. But you have to make a conscious decision if you can be yourself or if you can show
definitely.
affection, and just very simple things which a lot of heterosexual couples just don't think twice about. Do you think
Yeah.
that has got better over the years, or do you think we are where we were 10 years ago?
I mean, obviously I can base it off personal experiences or experience I hear at our BeYou group. Um, it's such a tough one to answer because obviously I don't know every LGBT person's experience. Going off personal experience, I mean, it was only a year and a half ago that I'd faced homophobia at work and took it to HR, and it didn't really have any conclusion. So I actually left that job. And that was the job I had before starting with this charity. So that was, yeah, only going back a year and a half. And homophobia is still rife in the workplace. Like you're saying, the right to be left alone, and things that heterosexual people don't wouldn't even cross your mind. Like on the train on the way back from a night out, me and my fiance, we have been catcalled. We've been asked to kiss in front of men, and it was a group of four men one time, and it was really quite intimidating. And actually, when I said we're not going to kiss for your approval, I was actually chased down the street. Now that was about 4 years ago, and I mean, when you first come out anyway, you've got that vulnerability about you. You're not confident in your identity. I mean, I can't speak for everyone. I know I wasn't. So facing that on a night out as a new couple, it's just not acceptable. And I still hear, I still hear things to this day. So it's hard to say whether it's got better, but all I can say is it's definitely still out there. The stigma, the backlash. Obviously, like you mentioned, different places, different societies will come with different viewpoints and issues. Obviously, it's layered with the more culture, the more multicultural places. It brings more cultural opinions, religion, family background. I mean, if we go back, homophobia, it's taught. It's a taught thing and it's a learned behaviour. Um, so I think, yeah, unfortunately, there's still a lot of backlash in society towards the community.
And
And
Slough is a very diverse place. Do you get to work with people from all different backgrounds, races, religions?
yeah, no, we definitely have a lot of different cultures, backgrounds, religions at BU, which really gives a wide scope on just how varied the issues are for every different person in the community. We've got people from different cultural backgrounds that are at risk of being kicked out through the shame it brings on a family, and they're quite tough cases when culture and religion are coming into it. But all we can kind of do is just protect the queer person, support with housing, support with mental health support. We offer counselling as part of our BeYou service. So we've got a few BeYou clients who are going through counselling at the moment. And we also have a lot of people who come through our doors and they're just so glad they found us, because I think I should have mentioned earlier, we are actually the only LGBT support in Slough. and the surrounding areas. Um, I think the closest LGBT support service, tailored LGBT support service, is in Bracknell. So, as much as we're based in Slough, we have people from Windsor, Reading at the moment coming over, Maidenhead. It's, yeah, the lack of support is really, it's a big worry. And our service is just so vital because the more BeYou is, the more outreach we're doing, we're seeing a growth in service users, which is amazing. And with that growth, we're finding the hidden people in society who really do need our service and just that social support behind them, and a sense of community, because a lot of the people at BeYou don't have that sense of community, and it's so isolating, to be either questioning your sexuality or even be confident in your sexuality, yet have no one around you to kind of support you through that or just say it's going to be okay. And that's just what a lot of people need a lot of the time. I know I like to compare it to race, and I like to say if you're from a certain culture or race, more often than not, a lot of your people in your household are of the same culture and race as you. Obviously, not all the time, but more often than not. And with being queer, it more often than not means you're the only one in the household. So it can be incredibly isolating, especially if your family and friends don't
That's a really
support you.
interesting way to think about it because you're suddenly with people who you're really close to, but through ignorance or prejudice
Mm,
or just really not knowing what to do at all, it really is isolating, as you say. And as a
yeah.
country, we have come a long way when it comes to support and acceptance for people of all sexualities. And we've got further to go. But what do you think have been some of the biggest achievements in the last few decades, which has made a real difference to the people's lives?
I'll start by saying you're right. There is still a long way to go. But it's, of course, important to celebrate the achievements that there have been. It's not all doom and gloom. There have been some significant achievements in the movement over the past decade. So obviously we had the big one, the same-sex marriage legalised in 2013. Personally, I can't believe that was only 2013, which just shows, I mean, that's in the last 12 years that gay people have been able to get married. So that was a big starting point. Actually, I know before that we got adoption and fostering rights, again, another milestone. Um, in more recent news, and local news, actually, I don't know if you're aware of the couple. They're an online influencer couple, Whitney and Megan, and they're from Windsor. And I think it was in 2023. They were amazing. They pushed and fought for equal fertility rights for same-sex couples, and actually it was all done through the Frimley system, with them being local to Windsor. And they won that fight and they gained equal fertility rights, which meant IVF for same-sex couples doesn't cost any more than it would for a heterosexual couple. So that's an amazing achievement. Um, I mean, there's thinking about representation, that's another big achievement, I'd say. I mean, there's definitely more representation on mainstream music. Um, yeah, I think they're the big ones. We're seeing more queer characters in TV shows, more queer musicians actually hitting the charts, um, and getting the opportunities that heterosexual, cisgender counterparts would anyway. Um, but I think talking about mainstream TV and music, I have to also mention representation isn't getting better in all mainstream platforms. If we look over at sports, that seems to be the one that's kind of lagging behind. in particular male sports. I mean, if we think about football, I think there's still only two men's professional footballers who are openly out as gay. And if you look at the statistics, there's more Premier League footballers who are queer, but unfortunately, the game just isn't up to speed to kind of support them through that. And more often than not, it's the fans that kind of hurl the abuse and the hate comes out once a player's gay. I mean, it all goes back to what's he going to do in the changing rooms, all that nonsense. So I think there's been major achievements. I'd personally like to see representation in sports kind of get a move on and happen a bit more. And I think it will take just a few big athletes to kind of be so brave and come out, and hopefully that will start a movement.
And what does that mean for the community? Because essentially, more people coming out, does that representation mean that the more of us who are out, the better? Because it shows that we're out, we're proud, and actually there's quite a
Yeah,
few of us. Because I think I was reading that in the UK, lesbian gay people make up around 8% of the population, which, although a minority, is still pretty sizable, of almost 1 in 10 people. So,
yeah.
and that doesn't seem to be reflected that well. But what would it mean for you or for anyone you know to have athletes come out more, or for more of them to be in sport?
People always say it's 1 in 10. It's a small community. I always say it's 1 in 10 of people you know about. There may be people who haven't answered that census questionnaire being truly open, and factors can come into that. That could be they don't want their family to see that tick box on homosexual, bisexual, trans. Um, so yeah, as much as there is statistics, I always think they can't be that accurate because you just don't know who didn't answer that question. Um, but going back to representation and why it matters, one of the great sayings I love is you can't be what you can't see. And I think that is so important. And growing up, just bringing my personal experience into it, I wasn't surrounded by many gay characters on telly, queer characters in movies, TV shows, in sports. More often, if they were a queer character, it was all based around a heavy storyline and issues with coming out, and the character was kind of based around being gay, not just they're gay and a character, if that makes sense. Um, so growing up, I personally would have loved to see more lesbians on telly, or even just any queer person. Um, I mean, it comes back. You can't be what you can't see. If you don't see yourself reflected in the media, then you kind of you get kind of makes you feel like an other, and I'm the weird one. Like I can't see anyone else like me, so why do I think this way? So that's why I'm so pleased that representation is growing, and that's not just with the queer community. I mean, it's communities in general, and it's more representation, more ethnicities being shown on TV, more races, more cultures, more religions. Ultimately, it all just aids to people seeing themselves reflected in order to know it's okay to be who you
Just
are.
to show that it's normal, it's pretty dull, actually, nothing that
That's
novel.
it. We're nothing
Let's
special
get on
over
with it.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stop being so intrigued. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think a lot of the times in society, I think people want to know why and want to know all them little details because it suddenly becomes something, oh, this is new, this is exciting. But
Mm.
oh, you're right, we're just people. We're just, yeah, we're nothing special. I wouldn't ask a heterosexual person how they have sex, how they came out, because that's not needed. But I mean, I get questions, I've been questioned on my sex life. I think people don't even realize, just casually asking, so how did you come out? That can be quite triggering for some people.
Mm.
And it may not be like a really casual thing to answer, just like lightheartedly. So I think, yeah, definitely there needs to be less invasion in society, and this feeling of needing to know all the details in order to understand someone. Because that's another thing I always say, you don't have to understand something wholly to respect it.
Quite. And on achievements, I think one of the biggest achievements we've had in the country is that England is on track to end new HIV transmissions by 2030. That is amazing. And since 2019, it's already down by over a third. And a lot of that is to do with HIV opt out testing, and also in 2020, the prevention drug PrEP being available on the NHS. But that is amazing news. And I know that you also help run the HIV podcast. So it would be fantastic to hear more about that and your views.
So starting with the 2030 target, I mean, it's an amazing goal, and if that happens, absolutely amazing. I mean, we'd be one of the first countries to do so. Um, Unfortunately, it's easy to say. So as much as the government are on this mission to end transmissions by 2030, which is 4.5 years away, um, unfortunately, as a small charity who support HIV positive people, we have kind of a different mindset. We're hopeful, but with such a big goal like that, it comes with funding support services, funding the opt-out testing, and a big announcement like that. Unfortunately, it has to come with support for the local charities and the national charities supporting HIV positive people, and funding is a big issue towards that goal. Um, it would be amazing, and like I said, we are hopeful for that, and we want to work towards that. Of course, we do, but we're also realistic, and we're gonna see. We're expecting a rise in support through the opt out testing, which again is a brilliant initiative. I'm not sure if the wider public are aware of it. Well, it started in two hospitals locally, but ultimately it means that everyone who attends an A&E department will be tested for HIV unless they opt out. Um, Now I think that's a brilliant way to tackle the late diagnosis problem that we have in the southeast, and also tackle the people that would never think of testing, because I think as a society people are still quite boxy with HIV, and they like to put it all in one box, which the 80s and the HIV/AIDS crisis back in the 80s, that didn't help with the government message that was sent out. It still lingers to this day, them tombstone adverts, the "Don't die of AIDS" tagline. That is still so heavy in society, that people are so unaware that HIV doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anyone. Yeah, so in terms of the HIV podcast, it's doing brilliantly. So I can't take all the credit. It's our amazing hosts, Jess and Sarah. They do such a brilliant job. It's a weekly podcast, so as well as working at the small HIV charity, they also record weekly and publish a podcast episode weekly. And actually, it's listened to at the moment in 180 countries, which is just amazing. We really are a small grassroots podcast. Jess and Sarah still kind of record from their bedrooms or living room. We don't have a fancy studio. So seeing all of the countries it's reaching is just beyond anything we could have imagined. Jess and Sarah are the amazing hosts. I'm more in the background, checking on the sound quality, doing all like the little technical bits. And I can jump in with editing if Jess has ever took a break from the podcast. But yeah, it's reaching amazing heights. Last week we had, well, we started a series about the Trump administration, which, wow, there was a lot to talk about there. And I won't get into what the Trump administration has kind of done with HIV funding or not done. But from the back of that little mini series, UN AIDS got in touch and they actually came on the podcast, and we recorded with WHO, the World Health Organization, last week, which are just guests that we could never have kind of seen in the near future, which is just brilliant to get that awareness and education out there on that platform. And as well, we reach countries and we get messages from people in really small, like, I mean, we've had people from African countries message us to say thank you because the country that they live in don't have equal HIV rights nor freedom to medication. And we are their support through the podcast, which it just makes it so worthwhile. And yeah, it's going amazing.
What is it that you're focusing on now in your job, and how can people find charity online?
Our main focus, kind of going forward this year, is to really push out our training, I would say, our inclusivity and awareness training. So we have given the training to quite a few organisations around Slough and had really good feedback, which was amazing. And we're getting more and more organisations coming to us for the training, which is just brilliant to see that want in society, and organisations that want to learn and to support the community. I think our training that we offer is really good, if I do say so myself, because we try to come at it from, we don't want to tell people what to do. We don't want people to act like you have to do this, you have to do that, and we don't want to scare people either. So we understand there's a bit of hysteria in the wider society at the moment around the language, all the new language, the media's kind of involvement in that hysteria has trickled
Are you
down.
talking about pronouns, or are you talking about lots of different names for different sexualities?
Kind of it all. We hear so many people say, "What's all this new language? How are we expected to keep up with it?" And I kind of say, one, it's not new language. It's kind of always been there, just in different ways. And yeah, you're right. It's focusing on pronouns, why to ask pronouns, how to ask for someone's pronouns, and we also go over what happens if you do get it wrong, because I think some people get scared to talk about LGBT issues through fear of getting it wrong. Now we say it's better to try and say it and get it wrong than to not say anything at all. So that's what our training's kind of all based around, just making people at ease with using pronouns and getting used to that becoming part of their language.
Pronouns, when you're having a conversation with someone like we are now, I don't find I ever use people's pronouns. So if someone says,
yeah,
"Oh, my pronouns are she, her," I'm like, I don't know how I'd use this in a discussion with you.
No, you're right.
I struggle with that.
Yeah, and that's what I say to people all the time. I say, there seems to be this like mass hysteria over pronouns, yet they don't get used that often, really, when you're talking to the person. They're important.
But why are they so important then?
So they're important when referencing that person. When that person's out of the room, how do you refer to them? And I know a lot of people are kind of hung up on why do I need to put my pronouns in an email signature? And it's all just to get society used to it, to make it a normal thing to ask for pronouns and to share your pronouns. Ultimately, it just makes that one trans person in the room, it makes them less of an other if they have to be the one to raise their hand and say my pronouns are blah blah blah. If everyone's doing it around them, it kind of aids that inclusivity.
And for those people who are struggling with their gender identity, where how they feel, their pronouns might change day to day, is that sometimes quite anxiety inducing if everyone around you is so confident with their pronouns? I am of mine, you may be of yours, but they
Yeah.
may not be. And actually sharing those, they might not feel confident. They even really want to know what they are themselves that day. Is that an issue that you've come across?
No, that's so true. Because obviously I can't speak for a trans person. My pronouns are she, her, and like you said, I'm very confident in my pronouns. But I can imagine for some people, like you're saying, it's not as easy. Um, they may be confused. They may not know what their pronouns are yet. So we do have a few people who have come to BeYou who actually turn up with different pronouns every month and different names. We have trans people who will show up different name every month because they're trialing that it's not easy to make a new name for yourself. And I think they're little parts people don't really think about much. It's, yeah, choosing that name of your true gender. Well, you've got to trial it first to see that you're comfortable with that name. So we have people trialing names out at BeYou, trialing pronouns out, and I think that just aids to how much of a safe space it is for the community, that people are comfortable to show up. And kind of one month it'll be he they, next month it could be he him, next month it could be she they, but ultimately it's about respecting what that person's pronouns are on that day and going with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've often thought that shouldn't we just not matter what our pronouns are? Our sort of identity in that way is like the least interesting thing about all of us. And also, I kind of just worry that it gives people a way to hurt you if they know that them getting your pronouns wrong is going to be hurtful to you. Because I
That's
always
a good
think if
point.
someone called me he or him or whatever, when I'm not even there, it's not going to bother me. And it really shouldn't. And that sort of acceptance of yourself, however you see yourself, how other people see you as well, you shouldn't sort of give up that strength for other people not to hurt you through these areas.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I've never really thought about people using it as kind of a weapon tactic. Um, but I mean, it's kind of a hard question because for a lot of people, pronouns do matter and are important. Obviously, I can only speak for my experience and I don't want to speak for the trans community. But I can imagine if you've grew up most of your life as a gender that you're not, and you know inside you're not, being able to use your pronouns, your true pronouns, I can imagine there's just such a importance on that because you've not had that throughout your life. Maybe that's where the importance comes from. But unfortunately, I don't know if I'm skilled to answer that question.
I remember when I was on Woking Borough Council as a councillor, and there was a real issue of domestic violence provision when it comes to shelters, because a lot of shelters are very focused on women, and this concern of a lot of, especially gay men, coming out of domestic violence experiences with either their family or partners, and how to actually get them to a refuge that wasn't a million miles away. What experience have you had with working with the community, going through could be emotional abuse, financial abuse, physical abuse, and how you've supported them?
Um, as a charity, I mean, we're aware of the statistics and the rates of domestic violence that do affect the LGBT community, in particular gay men, like you've mentioned. And I think the lack of support around gay men ultimately comes back to the lack of support for men in these spaces. Um, but as from my BeYou head, we get clients coming to BeYou for support and counselling quite often because they are going through emotional abuse in their home, and that can be from parents, siblings. A lot of the time, it's parents and siblings, and that I'm aware falls under domestic violence. And that can be, I mean, a lot of the time, not all the time, but again, culture, religion can actually have an impact on that emotional abuse at home. Um, and a lot of the stories I've kind of seen come through our door, um, it's the language around the shame on the family. Um, how could you do this to the family? If you are gay, that's it. That we'll cut you off. We'll kick you out the house. Like I mentioned before, we've got people as young as 18, literally on the brink of homelessness. That they go through every day not knowing if that's going to be the day they get kicked out, and then where do they go? Where's that support after they've been kicked out? They're vulnerable anyway because they're young. They're vulnerable because they're LGBT, and they're vulnerable because they've now been made homeless. So it's definitely a big problem that affects the community. Um, and again, like you're saying, and the lack of spaces for that support when it happens. You're right. There's a lot of spaces for women under the domestic violence kind of category. But I think a lot more could be done in them spaces again to be more inclusive to other kind of walks of life and journeys. Like most problems in society and most issues, not one person goes through the same as that other person, and it's just making sure there's services for everyone.
Does your charity, or are you aware of any support of mediation between families who are just not accepting of their gay son, their lesbian daughter, having that discussion where it can be respectful and constructive, because
Yeah.
sometimes a third party just neutralizes it?
Yeah, that's it. So obviously I've mentioned we offer counselling at BeYou, but we are aware that we can't do it all either. So we do signposts to other organisations, and a local organisation that we work quite closely with is Dash, the domestic abuse charity. But they kind of support Slough, Maidenhead, the surrounding areas, and they're so inclusive. They have support groups for many different walks of life and different kinds of people. So they're brilliant at Dash, and we've actually linked in with them to kind of help them with their LGBT support, and vice versa. We advertise. We've got their posters at BeYou. So if we do have anyone at BeYou in our centre, them posters are there for them to see without it having to be kind of discussed in front of everyone. So there's little things we can do to kind of raise awareness of other support out there. But yeah, I think there's more to do for support around domestic violence, especially when it's LGBT issues.
So, final question to Zoe.
Yeah.
If you were Prime Minister, which law would you introduce and change, and why?
Yeah, so again, that was another tough question. So I know you emailed me that question, and I've been thinking about it. And ultimately, I'm going to just keep it within the LGBT issues. And it starts with trans rights, and I will always push for trans rights. Trans rights are human rights, so it starts there. And unfortunately, the rights aren't up to speed yet, and they are the ones kind of getting left behind in the community.
Is there
But
something you have in mind, or something specific?
Um, Definitely more healthcare rights. In particular, the transition journey for trans individuals. It's kind of made quite difficult at the moment. So changes to transition laws, healthcare rights for the trans community. But I also just wanted to point out another big law that would be straight on my list. I mean, it's crazy that I'm still saying this, but it would be a ban on conversion therapy. I mean, still to this day in the UK, conversion therapy is fully legal. Um, and although there's been movement to get that bill passed, so the last government kind of promised a bill to ban conversion therapy for LGBT people. Unfortunately, it left out trans people. So we, as a community, fought back and we kind of said we don't want a ban that doesn't include trans people. If it's going to be a ban, it's got to be for the whole community without any loopholes. So that was kind of promised with the last government, and kind of movement was took to get that bill passed. But then with the current government, they promised a full ban that included trans people. Unfortunately, we're still not at the place where that bill's been passed, nor being talked about that much.
I suppose the issue with it that some people have raised is that could it discourage people because they're worried about being criminalized to talking, especially with younger people who might feel uncomfortable with their body, who might be confused about their gender, who are exploring various things, not knowing quite what's right for them, of discussing this with them, of exploring their sexuality, exploring all sorts of other things. And those people might think, oh, do I not talk to that young person about these things because am I going to potentially be accused, or be it threat from, oh, this is just conversion therapy, when it's just generic talking therapy of talking through your feelings, what might be the right path for you, because everyone's different. No one's on the same track and that's what's right for them. So I suppose that's the thing we need to get right, to make sure that actually young people especially can have those access to talking therapies to work out what the right path is for them.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's that worry. We don't want people to say, we can't actually discuss this. If you think that might be the right thing for you, we'll put you on a track. And if you decide that wasn't the right thing for you 5 years from now, sorry, we didn't want to be put into prison for this conversion therapy law. I suppose that's the real concern. It's all about mainly protecting young people and those people who are just out to really help them.
Yeah, no, they're really good points, and I've heard that kind of circulated myself. Them kind of worries with a full ban, but I'm not clued up to go into it deep. But personally, I think them services would be able to still thrive and help queer youth, because unfortunately, conversion therapy tactics are actually, a lot of them can be under the emotional abuse kind of umbrella. And it's the emotional abuse, kind of emotional torture these individuals go through, that has a lifelong effect on them. I mean, even people who've been through religious conversion therapy often end up living as heterosexual after the therapy, but in later life, they're still that gay person that went into conversion therapy, and that's always going to be them. So that's my worry, that kind of not banning it affects people in a majorly worse way than kind of talking therapies could ever kind of put out to queer youth. I
suppose with lesbian and gays and conversion therapy, that's a bit more clear cut and understandable, because you're not going to be having physical surgeries or hormones or anything like that. It's you're gay and lesbian and that's it, really. Whereas it is more complicated for trans people. And hopefully the government will continue to consult on this to make sure that all sides as happy as possible, and it really is as watertight, so those young people can get the support they need,
Yeah,
and not go down potentially the wrong track for them, because everyone is different.
that's
But
it.
thank you so much, Zoe Coates, for joining me on the Berkshire Heroes podcast. It's been lovely talking to you.
And thank you for having me.